So when Phil and I thought of it, we thought of it, and I said, because I had this experience he hadn't, I said, you know, I'd rather be a friend than your collaborator. You know, I value that more. On the other hand, maybe there's a way we can do it where we won't test, we won't, I mean, it wouldn't have worked if he wasn't so easygoing, and I'm pretty easygoing, and, well, you know, Phil, I mean,
yeah.
You know, nothing is worth getting angry about, really. So the way we decided to do it, as you see, is swapping chapters.
You wrote Brady, he wrote J.W.
Yeah, so when we finally talked about it and thought, well, we can do this, and neither of us, both of us had just finished up a book at the same time and didn't have anything pressing, and, you know, well, let's try it, you know. Phil said, all right, I'll write the first chapter. I'll get something going, and I'll email it to you. Then you write the next chapter. So he wrote the first chapter, J.W.'s voice, in his narrative voice, and something was going on, and he emailed it to me. I said, all right, well, I got to get Brady down there. I got to think up a reason for him to get down to Martha's Vineyard, so I did. And
now wait, could I just interrupt here and ask, how come it was always that you wound up at Martha's Vineyard?
Well, there's only 3 books.
I know, but nevertheless, most of the action, doesn't it all take place
you're
on
right.
the vineyard?
You're absolutely right.
Was J.W. more rooted in place? It was easier to
always
Brady?
seemed to, we never talked about that. It was always kind of assumed that one of the attractions of our books and his book was the place, which is it's unique, you know, and people are really interested in it. But we didn't really talk about that. It's interesting that you would raise the question, because it didn't really come up. We just assumed that it would take place down there. Brady has clients all over eastern New England, so it'd be a simple matter for him to have a client down in Martha's Vineyard. J.W. really was rooted to the vineyard. I don't know if any of his books, if J.W.
One. Phil lived in Colorado for some years, and I think it was the 4th book, and I, due to my advancing age, can't remember the title, but it was an excellent book, and most of it took place in Colorado, near, if I remember right, Durango, which he knew.
Which is where he grew up.
But by the time you guys came together, J.W. Phil had decided to give J.W. a family. So he'd married Ziolinda, the lovely Portuguese lady, who I'm sure is Shirley, Phil's actual wife, who is beautiful and Portuguese and fabulous. And then they had the 2 children. And so really, if you think about it, it would have been difficult for J.W. And also, he didn't really have a job. I mean, he was always a kind of handyman, fix-it man, fisherman. They kind of, to the degree that you can today, lived off the land. And Z worked as, she's a nurse, right?
Yep, she's a nurse.
So J.W. really didn't have the financial wherewithal or the freedom to move off island, whereas Brady could.
And it would have been unlikely for him to get a case that would take him off the island.
He'd have to be chasing somebody from the vineyard to Boston, wouldn't he?
Yeah. I mean, anyway, the simple answer to your question, we never really thought about that. But, you know, if things had been different, we probably would have.
If you'd been able to carry on.
Yeah. Because I know that idea occurred to me, and it would be interesting.
Well, J.W. had been a Boston cop, and in fact had retired to the vineyard after, what was it, he got shot or something happened to him?
I think he did, I
think that was it. When he was, so it wasn't that he also did not have that route in Boston, and you could easily have worked out something
we could have.
On that basis.
Well, this was strictly a one book at a time thing. I mean, we wrote the first book, First Light. No one asked us to do it. I mean, we didn't even tell anybody we were doing it except our wives. You know, the Scribners didn't know we were doing it. My publisher didn't know we were doing it, and we didn't know if it was going to be any good. And even if it was any good, you didn't know it was going to get published, because that's how the world is, you know.
So you wound up with parallel, I mean, not parallel necessarily, but Brady had a case, J.W. had a case,
and they eventually merged.
Yeah, and you would find an intersection, right?
Yeah, and as we, you know, the second book, we kind of saw that a little more clearly, and it was a little easier to work that out. In the third book, the same thing.
Third Strike, you know, there's something really ominous about the title. I keep thinking that it was almost prescient that you called it Third Strike, since Phil died after it was done. It's almost as though, you know, it was...
I know. Yep.
I'm sure you're going to miss JW. You know, I think one of the hardest things, aside from, you know, your fondness for the person, but as a reader and as a fan of an author, to realize that the character's voice went silent when the author went silent.
I know.
That's so hard.
I've got tons of emails from people who was telling me that they're going to miss him. I mean, I am too.
I was a huge fan of the series. I read from book 1 with him. He came along later than you, so I was able to read A Beautiful Place to Die and all of the books as he wrote them.
No, I know. You and he were friends from
very good
the
friends.
get-go.
I absolutely loved his stuff. In fact, I fought so hard for him when Avon dropped the paperbacks, and there was going to be a potentially the end of the whole deal, and I just raised hell all over about that, because I was so fond of the books, and mercifully they did continue, but I was really scared there for a while. You know, I didn't have a publishing company then, so I couldn't say, well, if all else fails, you know, we'll keep them up. And that's a I have to tell you what, that's a terrible temptation. If you're a publisher and you're really a fan of an author, and something interrupts the cycle of their their publishing life, it's really hard not to want to step in and say, well, but it's not always right. It's really, you know, not necessarily going to be in their best interest or your best interest to do that. So I was glad that that Scribner continued with it. And then Scribner did publish these 3 books, so that was another reason I thought maybe you were on the Vineyard.
No, I mean, each book was its own separate thing, and when we finished Second Sight and we submitted it, the word we got was, well, we're going to have to wait a little while, see what the numbers look like for first. I mean, it was, you know, I know, that's how the business goes.
Absolutely. Scribner's is not a charitable institution.
I know.
In fact, they're pretty savvy at business, so they must have been happy with it. You know what else helped, I think, is the advent of the trade paperback as the predominant, it's really becoming, you know, predominant as a vehicle for keeping a book in print. The mass market paperback is pretty well being niched or for brand name authors who they can sell, whom they can sell at the airport. And thanks to that, it's possible to take First Light and Second Sight and turn them into trade paperbacks, and, you know. Which they have, well, the first 2 they have done. But that creates a life, you know, after a series. I think one of the unfortunate designs of a couple of publishers who do a lot of small books is that they really don't have a paperback outlet for them. And, well, you see that happen with your St. Martin series to some degree. And the trade paperback is now making it possible to be kinder to all of that. And ideally, because of the print-on-demand technology, once you put a book in trade paperback format, it's all sized up and typeset and, you know, ready to go. You don't have to make reprint decisions anymore, because you can simply switch them over. And the 2 major wholesalers have that facility. So I see increasingly, when I'm looking for older titles, what we call backlist at the bookstore, if I look at one of the wholesaler warehouse things, they will say available as print on demand, and it's almost always a higher price, you know, because there's no real profit in them. But the good news is, then, I think that a lot of older books by authors, I mean, a lot of your older books are just not available to read right now at all, that is going to allow that to happen. Do you know Archer Mayer, who lives in your neck of the woods, Vermont? I had a very nice email from Archer, another author I'm crazy about, and he's joining you at St. Martin's. His next book will be published there. But Archer has, I think what he said to me was, I've mortgaged the house, and he has republished all of the older Joe Gunther titles, and that all works in this new deal. So I rushed out to support them by, you know, buying a couple. A couple of my staff said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, you know, I want to support them. I'm sure that I can sell a couple copies each, and then we'll quietly reorder as we go." And I thought, well, good for Archer to, you know, to do that. Yeah, I know. I saw him, I don't know, a month ago at some event, and he was telling me all about it. He wants other people to
go in with him. I mean, he wanted me to do that. I don't, you know.